Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. And today we have a guest from that small province of Ontario in Canada. And I'm just going to let him introduce himself and he can just talk away from there. The first question really is, what's your name and what's your ministry journey? And I think this is going to be very interesting. So Henry, no, sorry, not you're Henry. You're not Henry. All right, no, sorry, Chris.
No, that's okay. That's okay. My name is Chris Atkinson, and I'm a pastor in a church called Pinewoods Chapel, which is a smaller town located in Angus, Ontario, about an hour and a half north of Toronto. And I'm married for 28 years. I've got 4 kids. Some of them are married, and they're spread through Ontario and also out on the west coast in BC. And I have a very interesting background. I was born into a Christian family. I'm actually an 8th generation Christian.
8th? Wow.
Yeah. My kids are 9th generation, so it's kind of a real unique setting for us. In the beginning, I didn't realize how special that was until now that I'm actually pastoring and working with people that don't necessarily have that heritage.
Yeah.
Anyway, my family still lives close. My brother lives fairly close to me. I'm in the same area that I grew up in, and grew up a farming family. I even had sheep for a while, which is kind of interesting as a pastor now.
Yeah, sure is.
And, yeah, so our family has had sheep since the Depression era in terms of timing, and so there's lots of history there for me. And I think the other thing that's unique about me is that I didn't go into the pastorate at a young age. I didn't get into the pastorate until I was in my mid-30s.
Oh, really?
And so there's a whole story that goes with that too.
Sure.
Which is I don't know if we want to take time to get into that, but
let's take a little time. It may help.
So yeah, sure. So for me, having grown up in a Christian family, I accepted Christ when I was 7 years old. My mom was a church secretary. My dad was a deacon in a small town church, and was quite used to, I actually used to serve quite a bit in the church as a teenager, and even as a young adult, and doing different things. So during that time, God called me to be a pastor. I remember specifically the timing, the service, and everything. And I just said, no, I don't want to be a pastor. There's no way that I am going to do the things that these pastors do.
Yeah.
And so that actually surprisingly led into a time of rebellion in my life. But this sense that God had called me into ministry never went away. And part of the problem was, because I had grown up in the church, I knew that I needed to use my spiritual gifts. And so as I got married and started to be involved in the church, I used my spiritual gifts. And I'd have people come to me, "Are you a pastor? You should really be a pastor." They would say these things to me.
You weren't catching on, eh?
Well, I was, but I was still fighting God. I was really fighting God on this. And so eventually it was a 14-year period where I finally surrendered, and I said, "Okay, God, I will do this." And when I did that, God just opened doors, and it was a really cool time when I finally surrendered and said, "Okay, I will do this." But in the meantime, I had already worked outside of the church. I had done a number of different jobs and different things, and ran my own business and things like that make me unique to come into the church setting. Plus I had that shepherding background and all of this other stuff. So I'm this unique second kind of career pastor. And now I've been at my current church for 15 years, which has changed drastically over the time period that I've been here. And I know we're going to talk more about that.
I'd love to hear about that part. Yeah. Now, just tell me your background with the church. It goes back a number of years that you're currently pastoring in. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So the church I'm currently with was planted in 1961, and it was planted in the tradition of Plymouth Brethren.
Mhm.
And if you know anything about the Plymouth Brethren, you know that they have different uh, sort of ways to handle things in terms of whether they're closed brethren or they're an open brethren
Yeah.
and all of that. And there's some brethren that are maybe more progressive than others. And this particular church was planted in the tradition of the closed brethren in the very beginning. And so they had things like a Lord's Supper service. They had a gospel hour. They had things like Wednesday night prayer meeting, but they also had a lot of traditions that went with that too. And we could talk about theological things like fencing the table
Mhm.
or the seat of the unlearned at the back of the church. Like all of those things were practiced in this church at some point in the past.
So
And so
this began in 61 then, at the church
61,
plant itself.
yes,
Yeah. Mhm.
yes, yes. And I, to be honest, growing up in the area, I had never even heard of the church before. And being a church kid and going to different youth groups and having friends that went to different churches, like I didn't even know this church existed until I was in seminary. While I was in seminary, I had a friend that was in a small group I was in, and his dad actually attended here at Pinewoods. And they, because the Plymouth Brethren have this value on the laity, which is a
Oh,
great,
very much so. Yeah.
yeah, it's a great value of priesthood of all believers. And
Mhm.
so they had this system of teaching where the elders would rotate preaching, and that they would bring in elders or pastors or speakers from other places on the off week. And so they were looking for somebody, and they asked me to come. And I I said yes. I'm a seminary student. I was looking for opportunities to speak and practice on them. And
Mhm.
and and the crazy thing that happened was when I came, they liked me and they liked my teaching. And
That's
so they
helpful.
kept,
Yeah.
yeah, that's very helpful. Yes. So then they asked me to come back, and then as I was getting to the end of my seminary journey, they asked me to come and be their pastor.
Mhm.
And I said no. And that was probably, so I've been here for 15 years, and that was 4 years before I actually finally said yes.
Oh.
Um, and you kind of got to understand some of the things too of why I said no. It wasn't just that I was resisting what God was doing. I had a couple of churches ask me to come, but this this situation, I didn't really feel that it was going to be that comfortable for me. Like there was a lot of things that I felt were problematic to come. Um, First of all, I think one of the biggest things I saw right away was the fact that they were very brethren, and I had no experience with the brethren at all.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of values that I think I could embrace that they had, but their practice and how they did things was radically different. I grew up in an evangelical missionary church,
Mhm.
um, which it's just different. Like
Yeah.
I grew up with a pastor, and this church didn't have a regular teaching pastor, and they had a commended worker, but that commended worker did not even maintain office hours or have office space in the
Mhm.
building. And so there were just a number of things like that I was like, if I come, this is going to be maybe different than what you are expecting and what I'm expecting. And so we, so over that 4 year period, because they would ask me to come and speak, and I would still come and speak. And so I got to know them, and they got to know me. And we had a couple of times where we just sat down together, myself as a potential pastor and the elders board, and we had some pretty strong conversations about what things would look like if they were to actually follow through on this process of asking me
Mhm.
to come as a pastor. So in the end, what actually happened is that they agreed that they wanted to shift away from a let's say a traditional brethren model
Mhm.
to a pastoral model of leadership within the church.
Yeah.
And they were excited because there was a number of things that they wouldn't have to do anymore, which was to look after the preaching. I would be doing the
Yeah.
preaching. I would be taking care of a lot of the administration and leading the ministry and being that point person. Being involved in the community was another value that they really wanted, which I also agreed with, that was important, that because the church wasn't visible at all. People
Yeah.
didn't even know it existed. And because of its background, it had been very closed-minded to the community. And so outreach was a problem, missional work was a problem, and because they were also closed, there were all kinds of just being outdated, whether it was songs or technology or how you just do things today
Yeah.
in this world that we live. And so after some, long prayers with God, and I'm sure they were praying too, because they were, in those days, they were very excited. They were just excited to venture down this road.
Mhm.
And in those days too, I think I was naive in the sense that I didn't fully understand the brethren mentality about how to do things
Yeah.
inside the church. And so in those beginning, I would probably say the first 2 years, I stepped on a lot of landmines, not because of that I was mean or
No,
anything, but
no.
just ignorance, just real ignorance of not really
Mhm.
knowing what was needed in the moment, or assuming things that I just took for granted.
Yeah.
Um, but again, they were so excited to start down this road, and I think from the congregation's perspective, they didn't realize how much change was about to happen
Yeah.
when there was this shift to a pastoral model.
Mhm.
And they were excited because there was a lot of benefits for the congregation, but they didn't realize how much would change.
Yeah.
And so that began this journey. And I you talk about a honeymoon period. There was a great honeymoon period there
Mhm.
for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
by that time, and just to put this in perspective, the first Sunday that I officially came to the church, the attendance was 60 people. That included my family. Everybody was there. Everybody
Mhm.
knows everybody. And a year and a half later, our Sunday attendance was like 180. And
Oh,
that, to this
that's
little
a
church
change.
that had, that is a massive change.
Yeah, it is.
And and this little church that had never really welcomed visitors, had not had people from outside, now had twice as many outside
Yeah.
people as the original
Yeah.
group. And it just rocked the church. and
Mhm.
and to be honest, it was a difficult time, because people left, and because everything had to change. It
Yeah.
just, like,
Yeah.
so many things changed. And so that threw me into this position of being involved in transformational leadership.
Mhm.
And if I was to do it all again, I don't know that I would change anything about how I did, because I still was respectful to their traditions. And there's a number of traditions that the Plymouth Brethren practice, we still practice today.
Yeah.
Like, we still do communion every week. It's a great thing to do, and we do it differently than they did it then. But it's rich. It's a rich time, and a number of people. And it's interesting, since COVID has happened, we sort of adjusted that a little, and people have said, "Oh, I really miss how we have evolved to do that." And so
Mhm.
now, with restrictions lifting a little, we're back to the way that we were doing it, and people are really
Oh, good.
enjoying it.
Yeah.
So it's when you're talking about a traditional church and shifting to, uh, I don't even know if you want to use the word more or untraditional church.
Mhm.
Um, there's value in being in history and things that are historic, and to bring them forward in a fresh way. And I think that's the most challenging thing to do in transformational leadership, is to sift through the things that really have meaning for a group of people, and then bring them forward in this way that others can appreciate them and enjoy them, and just reaffirm the value of those things. And so I would still even classify us as a traditional church in values and doctrine, and even in some of our practices, but it's just refreshed, and it's like God has blown his spirit into it, a fresh wind, and yeah, there's been some changes, but essentially some of those things are all still there. So it's been an interesting journey over the 15 years to see. And so today, so in that process, we sold the old building, and we bought new property. We went into a school, we built a new building. We're in our new building now. And we're a totally different kind of community, where we have every denominational background represented. And that's another challenge too, as a community church. We have a very unique ministry here in the town, where actually there's only a few churches left in the community, and we're happen to be one of them. And we're not a large church, but we're the largest in the community. And it's an interesting situation to find ourselves in. I'm the only full-time pastor in the community, and again, that has ramifications. I get most of the calls for funerals and all of those things. So it's a very unique setting, in the sense that it's not a small town. There's 15,000 people in the community, but it's still very much feels like a small town. And I grew up in a small town, so I kind of know what that feels like.
Angus itself, and 15,000 people, I imagine even 15 years ago, that size, it will have grown since then.
Oh yes. So when I came here, it was half the size that it is now. Like it was around 7,500 people when I came. So it's changed a lot too, and it's going to continue to change. And the demographic has changed. The people that we have come, in terms of what the visitors that came when I first came, where I'll just be blunt here, all white. And now we have all kinds of immigrants that come, and different nationalities. We're quite eclectic in terms of different cultures that are represented, and that just adds another level of leadership challenges at times, because we have every denomination represented in our attendees, and because we have different cultural backgrounds. It's learning how to navigate through those differences is at times challenging, but it has caused us as a church, as a leadership, to be very clear. And so we write a lot of things down now. Very clear. And even on our website, we're very clear about our positional statements on a number of items, so that as people are investigating us and trying to figure out whether this would be a good fit for them, that they kind of know a lot of that information before they come to the church. So
which is very helpful, as you say. When you start with, I would call it monocultural, which sounds like the church in 1961. It was a family, very much all same people, and then it's just changed. People have to know, this is who we are, and we are, as much as you're trying to be inclusive, you're also trying to say, but at the same time, this is who we are.
Yes.
Okay, you've brought up about many questions that I would love to ask, and how much it relates even to myself and the ministry that I'm involved in a small town, about 5,000 people. Having gone from very monocultural into probably, and some would say a quarter of the town now is international of some type, and immigrant, and in the middle of the prairies, and nobody else, nobody else around. And somehow we've got this whole different town. What are you doing right now that even 2 years ago you would say we had to adjust from what we were doing 2-3 years ago? Well, COVID, of course, is in on that, but
Yeah, COVID. I like it. I'm just kind of like almost overwhelmed by that question, because
yeah.
it's a hard question to actually answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would almost say pretty much everything.
Okay.
How how we even think about connecting with people, how, because everything is massively changed because of COVID being online, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
but also what we've seen happen here is because of COVID, a ton of people have sold their houses in the city and they've moved further north
Oh, I guess,
to
yeah.
get out of the city. And so because of that, we've had this huge influx of more urban type people with multiculturalism sort of on their front door.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they come, there's certain expectations, and we could talk about food at the potluck. There's
Oh,
there's just one little thing there that, oh, okay, so we've got some really spicy food at the potluck, which we never had before. Just something like that, so simple, but yet it has a profound effect
yeah.
on on just being the church together. And how people communicate, whether depending on what culture they come from or what age category that they're in, whether it's more face to face and telephone, or whether
Mhm.
it's texting, or whether
Oh,
it's video format, like
yeah.
all of these things in the last 2 to 3 years have just really impacted every area of ministry, and transitioning and pivoting and being um trying to stay with people, I think, has probably been one of the biggest things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I try and make a point of making myself available to for people, newcomers, to ask questions, but also to help them, because if they're new to the area, like we had somebody here in the summertime, they just moved to the area, and that's also an issue too, because there's a military base in our community, and so there's a lots of transient movement of military
Yeah.
personnel between bases. And so I remember this one lady, she came in and she's like, could you guys tell me where a good place to find a mechanic is?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
even having those kinds of resources as at your fingertips, so that you can share that with newcomers to the
Mhm.
community. And well, where do I go to see this person, or how can I find a doctor here, because I don't want to have my doctor down the city. So it's just radically, in a
Oh,
changing environment, there's so many variables that continue to move, and it's like this, everything's a moving target,
yeah.
nothing is staying the same, and it's very challenging to
So
be
so
able to pivot and shift.
yeah.
Anyway,
So
yes.
so let me ask a question that I've asked a number of people over this last while, and I don't even know what the right answer is, if there is a right answer. So in these last 2 years, the question is, what is the church?
Mm, mm, yes.
If
So,
you've got the answer, please tell us.
well, I'm going to tell you my opinion, because I've wrestled with that a lot, and I know when COVID first broke out, that was like the question that I was thinking about all the time. Like, what is the church, and
Mhm.
how is the church going to weather this, and what does that look like? And for me, the church is the people of God, and the people of God being connected to one another and to God, and using our spiritual gifts, and being involved in life together and discipleship together. And COVID actually disrupted all of our normal ways of
Oh,
doing church. But one of the things that started to evolve, at least in our community of faith, as COVID started to take shape, was just people being the church to each other without being prodded by programming.
mhm.
And so what I mean by that is that people just started to pick up the phone and say, how are you doing? Or drive over and connect with them. And it was very organic. And I was quite excited about that, because it wasn't something that was driven by leadership, because as leaders, we were trying to figure out, what are we going to do? And and it was like the body of Christ just started being the body of Christ in an unprogrammed way.
Mhm.
And so that was very, I think it was very encouraging, but it also made sort of doing church or being the church uh easy, because all of a sudden people were connecting. We were doing things on video, and so we had people sharing videos, and but it wasn't just the Sunday service. We had people just say, hey, could I do a devotional? I'd like to, share this. And we did that.
Yeah.
And so we tried to involve our own people in that, and it really made it feel like we were still a community of faith.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we sort of walked that line as a church and as a leadership of gathering when we could, in the way that we could, even if we had to radically change what that looked like. And that was also a really good thing for us to be able to define the church as, it's not as it's not so much what we do, it's that
Mhm.
we're together doing it, and figuring out how we can encourage one another, how we can still be teaching one another and devoting ourselves to service in our community and reaching others and praying for our neighbors and all of those things that really is the church, and what we see the church in Acts doing, living out their faith in that way. And so for me, it created this moment of some freedom from shackles or the way of
Yeah.
doing things. And I remember for us as a family, we one of our first services that we were online, we had this big breakfast. And as a pastor, to sit down with his family and have this big Sunday morning breakfast, that just doesn't normally happen.
Yeah.
And so for us, there was all kinds of benefits too as a family through some of that stuff that we just enjoyed that season.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I talk to a lot of pastors about this, because I'm not that, I didn't get that stressed through COVID.
Mhm.
And even now I'm happy. And I think part of that is because that our community of faith responded well to interacting with each other, and keeping in touch with each other and serving each other through it in the beginning. But for me, it was almost like an adventure. Oh,
Yeah,
cool. What's
exactly.
what what
Let's go for it.
what's going to be? That's right. What's next? And I've got that, a little bit of that entrepreneurial spirit in me, and so the change or the pivoting that needed to take place was just like, okay, this is what we're doing this
Yeah.
week,
Yeah.
and scrap everything that we had planned, because this is what we have to do now.
Yeah.
So that and again, that's just a gift. It
Yeah.
has nothing to, it's just God's gift that He's given me. So but that would be sort of my definition of the church, that we just need to be about discipleship and about reaching the lost and serving each other, those basic things. And that's, if we're doing that as a church all the time, then when COVID hits, it just morphs into something that works in that setting. And
Yeah.
I think we as a church have come through COVID quite well in terms
Well,
of all of that stuff.
I'm glad to be
Sorry.
talking with you, because I know there's a number of other churches that has not
Yeah,
necessarily been the case. Well, our
yeah,
time is
yeah.
just about up, unfortunately. It's gone way too quickly here. I'm gonna throw just one really open-ended question at you to finish off. And so if you could speak to other pastors, you've gone through a lot of transformation. 15 years, you've the transformation that you've talked about is just incredible. And these last 2 years, no question about it. What one piece of advice would you give to pastors as they look at transformation and change in their churches? Just one.
Just one. Well,
Yeah, right.
I'm going to try and give one, but
Okay.
I think they're closely related. And that is, I'm going to say that everything's got to come from a point of view of pastoral care.
Hmm.
When you're caring for a congregation, and again, we could talk a lot about this, because I bring with me a different understanding of what it means to be a shepherd because of my experience raising sheep.
Yeah.
And being involved in that and seeing all the metaphors that are in scripture. But a pastor who actually cares and the congregation knows that they care, it's a lot easier to build trust so that you can lead them through whatever you're proposing to change. And the other piece of that is actually listening to the congregation, because they will tell you what they care about.
Mm-hmm.
And when they tell you what they care about, and you come from the perspective of pastoral care, that you're caring for them and it's in the best interest of them, it's in the best interest of the church, then the trust factor, because you need a lot of trust to lead change, it's there. And I remember, we could get really specific about some things. Once you do a couple of things that they care about, and that you show them that you are caring for them from a pastor's perspective, they just come alongside and they're like, okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
And it really has transformed how they see things. And so they're very willing to go in a direction. And now it's kind of scary for me, because they just say, okay, Chris,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you think's right. And
Yeah.
to me, I'm not used to that much freedom. I would like a little bit more pushback to that, because that's, to me, I almost feel it's dangerous. But the reason why they're there is because they know that as a pastor I care, and they also have experience where trust has been built over time.
Yeah.
And that's why that's there. And I think as pastors, we don't necessarily want to pay the hard time building that.
Yeah, that's
trust.
a lot of work.
And
yeah,
it is. It's a lot of work, and it can easily be lost quickly by a failed promise or anything, really, just a misunderstanding. And so, coming at it from this perspective of pastoral care, where you're basically saying, I'm shepherding you and I love you, and this is really what you want, because this is what you said you care about. And so if we're on the same page, we're going in the same direction. And that I have found been the most helpful. And I'll throw this side one in.
Okay.
You can't change everything all at once.
Oh, really?
You have to pick. No. And so the way to pick which one you start with is, again, you listen to the congregation and you start with what the congregation wants to start with, not what you want to start with.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that pastors, when we want to change things, we're thinking about this leader that's out in front, and I've got this great vision and I'm going to make it happen. And that's you. That's not church.
Yeah.
So if you come at it from the perspective of listening and pick the one that the congregation wants to, you'll eventually get to do some changes that you think needed to be done. But you have to build that trust and that rapport, and the fact that they know that you're in it for them, before they're willing to send you down these other roads. So
wow,
there's some tidbit of information there.
Yeah, I think that's more like a mountain full of information. That sounds great. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I have just
Yeah,
enjoyed this.
it's
And yeah,
and I've been enjoying chatting with you too, Ron, and I appreciate your ministry and everything that God is using you in at this season of your life too.
all right. Great. Thanks very much, Chris.